Welcome to ACOP Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast, where we talk to leaders across our fellowship with the purpose of building connection and engagement. I'm Kim Cooper, your host and ACOP Next Gen Catalyst. Join with me each episode to hear stories that will challenge and encourage you in your ministry journey. Well, welcome to ACOP's Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast. We're happy that you've joined us today. My name's Kim Cooper, and I'll be your host for today. I'm the Next Gen Catalyst with ACOP. And today I'm eager to introduce to you my guests, Reverend Stan Powers and Reverend Chris Westby. As soon as I began dreaming about this podcast, these two were at the top of the list. And I'm really excited that they've given me their time today to share some of their wisdom. And so I just want to welcome you guys. Welcome.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks, Kim.
You're making episode 2.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, happy to.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Stan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, tell us a little bit about your family, and what your ministry role is these days.
Thanks, Kim. Happy to give you a quick synopsis. I'm a married man for 47 plus years, have 2 daughters, 7 grandkids, and I'm a rich man from that perspective. My current role is I wear 2 hats. On one, I serve ACOP of Canada as the regional director for the Pacific region. And on the other hand, I travel and relate to the ACOP movements in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, usually about 3 times a year, but always in touch. So I'm having a lot of fun these days.
That's awesome. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, well, I'm married, not for 47 years. Well done, Joan. Married with 3 kids. I got a 16-year-old who's just driving now. I've got an almost 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. My wife, Sherry, some of you may know her. She leads She International Ministries as well. And you can find out more about that by going to their website, sheint.net. I am the lead pastor of Sunrise Church, the second lead pastor that we've had, and succeeding from Pastor Stan, and live out in gorgeous Surrey, BC.
Yeah, you guys both live out there, hey?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
It's gorgeous. I love getting to come visit out there.
Anytime.
Awesome. Well, okay, so I have asked you guys to join me today because you guys have successfully transitioned from Stan. I believe you planted the Sunrise Church, correct?
That's right.
And how long did you pastor?
27 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys did a succession plan and now have passed the baton on to Chris. And now Chris is leading the church. How long have you been leading, Chris?
Yeah, just over 4 years.
Okay. So I have asked these guys to join me today just to talk about transition and succession. As many of you guys know, our ACOP churches have a lot of aging pastors, and we have been talking lots about growing our ministry young. And so in order to do that, we need to look at the topic of transition and succession. And so these guys have offered their time, they've offered their insight, and they've prayed that the Holy Spirit would just orchestrate this conversation so that it will help you if that's something that you are looking to do. So we have a few questions, few things that we're going to go through today, and we hope that it will encourage and inspire you and support you in wherever you are at with your leadership right now. So I'm going to start with you, Stan, and can you tell us how you knew it was time to begin the process of transition and succession?
Thanks, Kim. Well, it seems like ancient history now. It's been, as Chris said, 4 years since the completion of that. I would just say that when I hit my early 60s, a number of things came to my mind. Number one, it has to happen sometime. There wasn't a lot of good history of this in my experience. In fact, I saw a lot of people hanging on for many years after that, after what would normally be considered like 65 or whatever, and it just felt like it got weaker. I'd started Sunrise. I consider myself more of a founding pastor than a church planter based on my gifts and skills, but the reality was we were doing a lot of good, strong things, but there was a plateauing to it that felt like I needed to begin to look at that. I had not had the capacity or whatever to raise up someone from within. And so I started to draft a plan.
Awesome. So Chris, from your side of the perspective, how did you know that it was time to step into something like that? How did you know that Sunrise was the place and Stan was the guy to do that with?
Well, first of all, because I'm following such an amazing leader, that's how I knew it was a good place. But yeah, all jokes aside, the first thing was to pray. Sherry and I were in discernment before Stan even approached us. It felt like we were like it talks about the sons of Issachar. They knew how to discern the seasons and the times. We knew we were in a time and that we were ready for something in a greater leadership call. And in fact, the week that Stan had sat down with me, it was quite funny. I'd sat down with an elder at our church and he said, you're walking through your ordination. Is there going to be offers on the table after this? And I said, well, no, there isn't. And then like literally right after that week that I talked with Stan, I had 2 other offers that had come to us for other ministry opportunities. So we were like, whoa, okay. So we had prayed, we had discerned the season, but really it was, like I say, it was listening to God for the right timing. It wasn't easy. We had a great ministry going at the Regina Apostolic Church. We really loved what we were doing. It wasn't easy to do the process. And I think kind of start to finish, first conversation, I remember being in early November and we said yes to it by February next year. So there was lots of conversations along the way, visiting the church, coming out here, meeting leadership and all those things. Those were all key things to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. It's really about hearing the Holy Spirit and discerning, and those can be tough things, but so necessary. So, Stan, tell us, what were some of those first steps that you took?
Well, there's obviously lots of background I could give to it, but I came to a step where I wrote out a half a page of intent that I gave to my elders and then to the directors. And it just included a season, first of all, I'd come to a point where I realized that nobody would succeed the founding pastor if we didn't change some of our structures. And so I went through about an 8-month period where we adjusted the structures. We added a couple of teams to the system because I was running it out of my back pocket and trusted. And once we started some of those adjustments, then the plan was to identify someone to come alongside. I identified a 2 to 4 year period as being how we would make it work. Was because of the trust that I had, it was really kind of up to me to determine the timing and the structure, but I very much pulled a team together for us to scout and look for someone. And there was a number of names that we put on a list, and then I went forward and began to talk to several people. Didn't get very far because Chris was one of the first ones I talked to, and he was willing to talk to us. And so once you start doing that, you don't play any games with people's lives. And so it just began as a proposition to the elders that it's time for this to happen.
You spoke about that relational equity that you had with your church and your leadership, and that was probably quite key in them trusting the process that you were about to take them through, correct?
Yes, and one of the things I wrote down that may not come up is that because I was the founder, because I had strong equity, there are some pastors today that they need their process of succession should begin with just resigning and letting their church do it, because it needs to be the church. The church has to be highly engaged, and that's the point that I want to make.
For sure. And for that reason, your guys' story is somewhat different than a lot of the churches and lead pastors and even board members, leadership teams that might be listening to this podcast, right? So Chris,
Yeah.
tell us some of those early feelings and emotions and things that you kind of went through with your
Yeah.
family as you began this.
Well, really, at first it was a culture shock. People were like, oh, you're moving to the big city. But one of the things we found here is actually the pace was slower because, Regina had a more of a metro feel than where we live in kind of the suburbs of Metro Vancouver. So we
Okay.
found it was a bit slower. It felt a little bit kind of backwards. And the church in a culture sense was less charismatic than we were used to. So that was like some of the differences. But as we started getting into the planning, one of the things that we realized is that Sunrise was kind of a complex church, lots of moving parts, lots of ministries. And so that first bit of understanding, I remember saying no to things we were talking about, who are you going to coach with? Because I'm like, I don't think I can take that part on right now and keep my head above water to understand the rest of the stuff. So there was the complexities that you have to deal with, because you're not only coming in to understand people, the pastor people, you have to understand an organization and its functions, its complexity, its structures. Those things are all important. So it felt a little bit backwards at first from what we were used to, and then we had this big gap of how now we have to understand. So and just meeting people, understanding, asking questions. So that was kind of the first kind of things we thought about right away.
Yeah. So Stan, you spoke a little bit about how you began the process with your leadership team and like forming a group of people that would help you to do this. But how did you actually begin the process and start to, give this idea to the congregation and put that forward? What did that look like for you?
It's a very difficult thing today because communication in our culture is overabundant, and yet people don't go to the details very much. And the idea of me walking away was a big shock to lots of people. That's all I'd ever known.
Mm-hmm.
So I focused mostly with leadership, and we were very open on the elders and the directors side of things. And we put, but even when we began this process, we put that elements of that page on our website, and it included things like at the very bottom, this pastor that we're looking for is a potential successor in 2 to 4 years. Like, we just sort of let that, it was always there, it was in writing, and some people would get more word than others and would engage with me, but generally speaking, but that piece was always in writing and it was always available to people, and some people would ask me about it, but it was just and then once Chris was coming, then for a while, like, people have a lot of questions, they have a lot of clues, and church life is very difficult to move ahead in major things.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, I work with the leaders, but we let it be known. But I would say some people were still figuring it out 2 years ago after Chris and the pastor for 2 years. I mean,
it's true. Yeah.
Our church families are very complex, and people engage at very different levels.
That's
Absolutely.
Right,
yeah, for sure. So, Stan, one thing I've heard a few times from different people is how identity can become a bit of a struggle in these transitions. So, Stan, how did you deal with that on a personal level, finding your identity in the transition? Was there anything of note that you would share about that?
Well, I think that is a big piece. I think even what we know in our head doesn't change our emotions, our insecurities, our feelings.
Right.
I mean, the very first presentation I made to the elders, which would have been a full year before we went looking, or at least 8 months, the bottom section was always a piece, what is Stan going to do?
Yeah.
And I had like 6 things that I put there because we didn't know. And until you know who God brings into your life, you don't know how those things are playing out. The 2 things that I'm doing right now were number 2 and 3 on that list.
Okay.
The 6th one was, I said, I'll be a greeter at Walmart.
Yeah, it's true. He's not lying. It's true.
Still waiting on that one.
I would need more income, right? And most pastors, we aren't set up for fully financed retirement. And all my elders said to that is, I think that doesn't suit you, buddy. You better put a pizza delivery man on there instead, because I'm not Uh, I'm not highly, I'm a little bit of an introvert, etc. Right. So anyway, I'm just saying that I forget the question now. I started answering it, but
Well, but you brought up a good point, because I think we were talking about identity, but also I think security is um, a huge hurdle that someone looking to bring a succession plan in to their church, it causes a lot of insecurity for you, not just with your identity, but with your finances. So that was obviously something you thought about.
well, yes, and I, to this day, this is what, years later, and I still feel pretty strong and wanting to do stuff. I'm not really a retirement mindset very much. So, but the issue also hits the church because, and so by the time it started to become public, and I started to make some decisions, and the timing, and Chris was on the scene. The two things that I'm doing now, number 2 and 3, started to emerge as being the way to go, and it was a lot more comfort, and it's easier even for leadership to explain why the founder is exiting if he's got a landing pad down the road.
Right.
And it's easier for my own identity to know that these are the two things that I've been doing from a volunteer perspective as I've been the lead pastor. So,
Right.
but you still feel like you still have the same feelings of
Yeah.
Who am I now? But because I projected something down the road, it wasn't a really big thing for me.
Yeah. So Chris, as you entered the whole process and you're filling these big shoes, and everybody, I mean, Stan was the founding pastor, and that has some really significant feelings and emotions that people would hold on to. So what did you struggle with identity-wise coming into that situation and filling those big shoes?
Yeah, well, I remember a conversation with one of our leaders, and they said the phrase to me, "You've got some big shoes to fill." And I said, "I am not filling any shoes." I said, "I've got some sandals to follow, and those are Jesus's." Because
wow.
I'm categorically different than Stan. We're different in our extroversion and introversion. We think a lot similar in ministry mind as what we want to see happen in the goal, the overall goal. So what I wrestled with was I had to dismiss any imposed ideas that I would be Stan. I couldn't be Stan. And we actually would have a little bit of joke about it sometimes about how, I was a hugger and Stan wasn't much of a hugger. So we joke about things like that in sermons and stuff like that. But I think the big wrestle for me was, where is the line of honor and authority? And if I'm right honest with you, there were some of the leaders in the church that felt I took too honoring of a position to Pastor Stan. And I can't say enough that honoring the leaders that have gone before us is one of the key things that will establish an incoming leader. Because you're not trying to disassemble everything someone's done. You're not even trying to look for gaps where they haven't done a good job. You're trying to honor everything that's been done. So I had to learn how to walk in honor, but also walk under authority. And I said it this way in the notes as I was thinking. I didn't want to become an Absalom in the time of learning and growing. And I had hard decisions we had to make that were in the transition time that I pray that I did it with honor and really coming under his authority, because I wasn't the lead pastor yet. It wasn't until May 1st that I was the lead pastor. So anything before that I would have been doing as a lead wouldn't have been honoring. So that was really what I had to kind of work through in identity.
I like what you said about that honor. Katie Cole in our She International interview used the two words honor and honesty. And that really helped me, because I thought that was a fantastic, one of the gold nuggets that she gave us was, how do you walk in honor, but in true honesty for where you need to go. Yep. So I want to hear, what, Stan, did you not anticipate, good or bad, in this transition? Was there something that you, when I ask that question, is there something that stands out that you hadn't anticipated happening that you want to share?
To be honest, there's probably 100 things, but there's nothing that really jumps out at me. I as I thought about this for the last day, no matter how much I try to tinker with my Enneagram scores, because I have about 3 of them that really surface very close to each other, I still come out as a 6, which it has to do with anticipating what the consequences of things. And I think that's one of the things that, as I watch other people try to do what they're doing, it isn't so much that I had a better plan or was smarter or whatever. I see a lot of people who they just jump to all the positives really quick. See, that the downside of being a 6 is that you person that throws cold water in his hands, or that you're the negative person in the room. I've never felt that about myself, but that's what I'm saying is when you do that right, there's not as many surprises.
Right.
And
right.
Speaking to the people who are listening, I'm saying that when people are making plans, they need to figure out who they are and why they're, if you're too optimistic, I think you're going to miss a lot of pieces. So
yeah,
nothing really jumped to mind. Now that could be that I'm getting old and forgetful. So I pass it on back to you that way.
Pastor Stan, I think that's good because
yeah.
I'm reminded of the stories I've read about people who are in concentration camps and prisoner of war camps. The ones who had the highest level of optimism were the ones that in the end did the worst because they weren't facing the realistic side of things. And you have to balance that tension of optimism for the future with the realities of what you have to work through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I like what you said, Stan, about knowing where you were on the Enneagram chart. Knowing who you are helps us to prepare for difficult storms ahead and for the good things. But knowing truly who you are, the best leaders know who they are, what their weaknesses and their strengths are, so that you play to that to the best. So Chris, tell us, was there something that stands out to you that you just weren't anticipating?
Yeah, a couple things that we didn't quite anticipate, but we learned along the way. Number one, the church had to grieve Pastor Stan leaving and Pastor Joan not being in those roles. And you can think that's something natural here, but when you actually feel it with the church, and I think one of the things that, a practical piece that I think actually we felt it mostly, we had built up to this transition and succession. But one of the things I think we could have done better, we had an amazing event where we honored Pastor Stan and Pastor Joan, and it was well attended. We honored them. But right after that, we installed me as pastor. So because we had such a buildup in our hearts to the kind of to the changeover, but we just had this huge celebration. So you could see it on people's face. They were just like grieving for the first weeks, so I would say practically in that, if you're doing a plan like that, make sure you celebrate one well with enough space to celebrate the other. The other thing, some people loved us, some people didn't right off the bat, and some people let that be known to us, and okay, you're gonna love us, you're not, that's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing that we didn't anticipate is we faced a leadership challenge in the first 2 years, and it really came down to who was going to lead the church. We had some strong leaders that were around, and it came down to who was going to lead the church. And in the end, I would agree with what President West says. He talks about pastor-led church with leaders governing it and elders kind of shepherding it. So we really felt that was the call, that we were called to lead the church as pastors. So we had that. And that worked out. Like it wasn't the best ending it could have been, but it worked out for us. My leadership coach at that time said, "I'm surprised you were able to stay through that because it was such a hard season in the first 2 years." But we knew God had called us, and so we leaned back on that calling. So those were the things we didn't anticipate. Not everyone loved us. The church had to grieve, and we had immediate leadership challenge. For us, there was no honeymoon period in leadership. There might have been for the church that people liked us, but there wasn't in leadership. We were right in the den.
Well, and I think all three of those things that you highlighted are things that you can probably expect.
Yeah.
You might not anticipate them, but at some level, they're going to happen. And when you can lean on the call and knowing for sure that where you are is where you're supposed to be, it goes way, like, helps you get through that. That's what you can lean on. I like that. Thank you.
And I think for us is if we can offer anything as forerunners that we've done it and it's been done fairly well, that we can say, okay, anticipate this, but put it up at a higher level so you'll face it. Right.
Exactly. Prepare for it. Okay. So is there anything, like Chris, you kind of said, what you would maybe do differently. Stan, was there anything that you would have done differently in the process?
To be honest, I looked at that question and I don't even want to think about it.
It's over. It's done. Let's let
Well,
it be.
yeah, I feel like so the one of the things that I had attempted to do and is to very much involve the leaders in this process and to involve a transition time. And I believe that although there was a certain crisis slash conflict that Chris faced, there was also lots of others who supported him and
Right, 100%.
were ready for it, and they might still go through it. The subject of grief and loss was something that became very apparent to me very early on. That was one thing that I didn't think about even for myself. When you talk about identity, I would talk about loss, and that I built a family where people were very engaged, and when things change, they lose something. They lose their influence. They lose their positions. That's inevitable. I had lunch yesterday with a pastor who's starting this process, and I had to say to him, there are some people aren't going to make it. That's the expectation you're talking about, Kim. Some people aren't going to make it. What you don't want to do is try to identify them.
Right.
Identifying them becomes self-fulfilling activity. But you got to know some people aren't going to make it, and you got to know that there is normally a time of loss. And when you identify it as such, you go to the denial slash acceptance, that whole process of grief that Kyler Ross identified. And you just know that's where they're going through, and people need to allow themselves to go through that.
Right.
Like we do.
Okay. So my last question, I'm going to give you each an opportunity to answer this, and it's kind of two-part. So what's one thing that if you could share something to our listeners about transition and succession on how to do it well, what is the one thing that you would tell our listeners? And then any resources that you stumbled upon or were given during the process that you want to share. So let's start with you, Chris.
Firstly, for young leaders, don't be discouraged moving as fast as you think. Or the adage is that pastors want to do more in the first year than they usually can, but they end up doing more in 5 years than they thought they could. So don't be discouraged if it's not moving as fast or if the culture is not exactly what you want. And what I'd encourage older leaders or transitioning leaders that are moving out is start to trust people and start to release your leadership so that you can bring others in. And within that, the same thing that worked well for Pastor Stan is make sure you have a plan for what you're going to do. Studies and research show that one of the major impediments to a leader transitioning out of a role is they have no means of income. They have nothing to go to. So make sure there is a plan. Even if it's you're going to just be at the beach all the time, have a plan. And I've got some resources here I brought with me too.
Perfect.
I can flash those up right now.
Yeah.
I've got the book Next here, and I know Pastor Stan, you saw this. This is William Van der Bloen and Warren Bird. Really great book for succession. The other is Passing Leadership Baton by Tom Mullins. Would highly recommend both of those books. Those are probably two top ones that I read. ACUP has some good condensed material as well. And then what I would say for incoming leaders, Mike Bonem has written two books. One was called Leading from the Second Chair, and the other one's called, the newer one called Thriving from the Second Chair. This is great to understand as incoming leaders and as associate pastors, what it's like to lead and thrive in the second chair. So I'd really recommend those. Those are really handy. I give those books out to people and recommend them all the time. So.
Awesome. Excellent. How about you, Stan?
I've read most of those books now. To be honest, in church life, it feels to me like this all happened simultaneously with what I was doing. And the resources weren't there as much. I started picking them up as I did it. I did much of mine intuitively, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I did some reading. The books put up there. The big challenge that I had was whether I would stay in the church or not. I made a decision to do so, partly because I was going to be active and traveling, but 95% of the books will tell you not to do that. So that was probably the biggest challenge that I faced in it. And I feel like the Lord led me, and I feel like it's been part of it. My friend Owen Scott, who did something similar shortly after I did, phoned Merv Switzer from Regina and said, "What's your key?" Because he did that 25 years ago.
Right.
Said, "Have no opinion," and that's been the challenge. So that's one of the decisions that's a hard one to make. And I'm sure there's moments that both I and Chris have wondered if it was the right one or not, but I'm certainly comfortable with it still. Those are some of the hard things to walk through, and the resources. I pursued that one, and yet I disobeyed. So I don't know. It's an individual path, but there are certainly a lot of resources available now.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
I think one of the tests of a good outgoing leader would be, can they still be involved in the church and be your cheerleader and champion the next season of the church? And Pastor Stan, you've done that, so it's my pleasure to have you as part of our congregation.
Thank you. I would say though that number one thing on my list of those 6 oppositions was I just switched chairs with the person, right? And that depended on who it was. Right. Same with 2 to 4 years. So on my original list, there was a couple of people, but because I don't think you know that until you get into it. And absolutely. I had the kind of trusted people there that I was able to walk that out in a certain way. And plus these other things are coming up, but it'd be great that Chris was ready in the earlier stage of that 2 to 4 things. And I often kidded, I don't even know if I've said it to his face, but I said he had the learning and the training. He lacked the experience for it, possibly, but he was only going to learn the hard way, not the easy way. And he was ready for it. Somebody else that might have taken longer. And in my own life, there might have been others. Anyway, I'm just saying there's lots of things. The reason you provide some latitude and you have some counsel around you is to help you navigate those questions.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you guys for making yourselves available. We know that your situation, your circumstance was definitely unique, and it's not going to just be something that can be duplicated or fabricated somewhere else. But our hope and our trust was that this conversation would at least encourage or challenge or start some conversations around the topic, and that there's an opportunity for supporting one another, and even just tidbits that someone could say, oh, we haven't thought about that, or that sort of thing. So we hope that this has been a really encouraging time for our listeners today. I really thank you guys. It's been great. I loved learning from you today. So I just want to thank you so much, and we're excited for the upcoming interviews, and we have everything uploaded onto all of our platforms, so you can start subscribing now. So anyways, thanks guys for joining today, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.